Dr. Ashutosh Kumar retired as head of Department of Pathology, King George Medical University, Lucknow. He has a keen interest in the field and, and had worked on diagnosis of hemophilia for many years. He was the only doctor who has started diagnostic of hemophilia and other bleeding disorder in 1978 at King George Medical University, Lucknow. At that time, probably diagnosis of hemophilia was not available in the neighboring states too. Dr. Ashutosh Kumar is our mentor. He was the person who persuaded me for a society for the welfare of hemophilia patients and provided me the list of some patients that he diagnosed so that we may approach them to form a group. He was elected as the first president of Hemophilia Society Lucknow and continued for several years. I wish him a long, healthy, and peaceful life. I, on behalf of Hemophilia Society Lucknow, salute Dr. Ashutosh Kumar for his cooperation as a doctor, as a real friend, and well-wisher of poor patients of hemophilia.
Thank you, Machanda ji. Thank you very much for those
Welcome.
uh,
One,
gratifying words, I should say.
on behalf of Hemophilia Society Lucknow, one eminent personality present in this meet, Mr. Mukesh Garudia ji, President Hemophilia Federation India, New Delhi. I would like to give a special thanks to Mukesh ji for giving valuable opportunity to Hemophilia Society Lucknow for organizing the today's meet. We feel glad to inform you all that our society is one of the organizations which rendered continuous service during COVID-19 pandemic for the welfare of the hemophilia community. For this, we got full support from Hemophilia Federation India and from our team of doctors and volunteers. I am honored to be a part of this team. Today, we would love to hear from all of you. For those of you just joining us, welcome once again. Now, I would like to request Mr. Mukesh Garuya ji.
Thank you so much, Manchanda Saab, and good afternoon, everybody, and special good afternoon to Dr. Asutosh sir. It's always a pleasure to work with Mr. Vinay Manchanda ji because I have started the career and my journey of hemophilia movement when Mr. Manchanda was my first trainer. So I always appreciate and acknowledge Manchanda Saab's presence in my life, in my journey to hemophilia uh, movement, as well as in Hemophilia Federation India. Talking about physiotherapy is one of the very most important pillars in development of a person with hemophilia. For especially in a developing countries when hemophiliacs are born with rare usage of anti-hemophilic factor, where availability of anti-hemophilic factor concentrate is minimum. But we have been always advised in countries like underdeveloped countries and developing countries that if low dose of prophylaxis along with strong physiotherapy makes hemophilic very strong. At the same time, if there is not huge availability of anti-hemophilic factor, if a hemophiliac does physiotherapy under proper guidance of an expert who is trained in hemophilia, can really strengthen the muscle and the joints of a hemophilic. I have both my knees replaced in 2017. But before that, I was more or less active, has traveled around the world where physiotherapy has played a strong role in my life. So I would like to welcome all the physiotherapists across northern region, and I acknowledge that your presence in the hemophilia community, along with the centers you're working in, will definitely make the life of my blood brothers much better and easier. And I hope that hemophilics across your region, across your center, across your city, around your city, come to you, visit you, and get consultation from you and learn how to make the lives better. I also acknowledge the uh, support of the World Federation of Hemophilia in in giving the opportunity of our physiotherapists from across India a well structured, designed training program so that our hemophiliacs can become masters trainers and take it forward. Like we have some wonderful physiotherapists in India who are also one of the speakers here in the days to come, today and tomorrow, from Dr. Rohini Dange to Dr. Geeta Suri and various other. So I thank Manchanda Saab and for organizing this physiotherapy training program, and I believe that it will be very beneficial to all the hemophiliacs of northern region. So with that, I would sum up myself and welcome you everybody, and I'm looking forward to a very successful training program online. As Manchanda Sahab has said that during this COVID-19 pandemic, most of the sessions have happening on virtual platforms, and I believe this is an easier way to learn from home without traveling, but at the same time, gather as much as knowledge as possible. With that, I sum up and welcome everybody, every participant in this session. Thank you so much.
वेलकम मुकेश जी, बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद, आपने टाइम निकाला अपने बिजी शेड्यूल से। मैं समझ रहा हूँ कि काफ़ी वहाँ का टाइम बहुत ज़्यादा फर्क होगा, आप उसके बावजूद आए यहाँ पर। हमारी ओर से आपको धन्यवाद। अब मैं हमारे आज के सेशन के चेयरपर्सन हैं डॉक्टर आशुतोष कुमार जी को दे रहा हूँ ताकि वो आगे इसका सेशन को कंडक्ट करें। डॉक्टर आशुतोष कुमार जी, आइए सर, आइए।
First of all, let me thank the organizers, Mr. Vinay Manchanda and his team, for holding such a nice session for physiotherapy. Now, I just want to add one more thing, that has been a long journey in hemophilia at the Lucknow Society. When it was established, and there was one person, Dr. Ashok B. Verma, who was the president of HFI at that time, who had motivated me to start these things along, and Mr. Manchanda was a very willing father who contributed immensely to the development of the society. So we start this MSK hemophilia MSK workshop for physiotherapists. Today there are 5 speakers. In general, they will be covering the general aspects of the genetics, the treatment, and the laboratory diagnosis of hemophilia. Now let me introduce Dr. Rashmi Kushwaha. She has been my colleague and faculty member in Department of Pathology in KGMC, and she has been involved actively in the diagnosis of hemophilia. Thank you, Mr. Chanda. Dr. Rashmi Kushwaha, please.
Good afternoon to all the delegates. My mentor, Professor Ashutosh Kumar, Secretary Hemophilia Society, Manchanda ji, and Mr. Garudia ji. So I will start my presentation now. I have given the topic of laboratory testing of hemophilia. So I will be covering this topic under the following contents: specimen collection and processing, screening test, confirmatory test, and test to evaluate the circulating inhibitors. Blood collection is a very important part of the coagulation test. So while collecting the blood, we have to be careful that it should be non-traumatic collection, because if there is any trauma while blood collection, it will release the phospholipids, cause the activation of the coagulation pathway, and give the false result. So we usually choose the antecubital fossa vein for the blood collection. We apply the tourniquet, and within 1 minute of application of the tourniquet, we take the blood. For the adults, we use 19 to 21 gauge needle, and in children, 20 to 23 gauge needle. Now we have to be careful that we use the plastic syringe for the blood collection for any of the coagulation abnormality. If at all we don't have the plastic syringe and we have to use the glass syringe, then we have to take care that we coat it with the silica or even the normal Vaseline which is available locally to prevent any contact activation of the factor. Now, one more thing we have to take care is that when we are collecting the sample, the initial sample should be discarded or can be collected for other biochemical test or CBC. For coagulation, we take the second collected sample so that it does not have any contact activators or any kind of phospholipids released during the blood collection. So ideally, the test should be done within 4 hours of collection, and we use the anticoagulant sodium citrate 3.2% in the ratio of 9:1, where 9 part is the blood and 1 part is the anticoagulant. If the patient's PCV is more than 60%, this is a very important point, because if the hematocrit or the PCV is more, the amount of plasma will be less. So the citrate which we are adding will remain unused. And while doing APTT, when we mix the calcium, this citrate will chelate the calcium and we'll get the prolonged APTT. So to prevent that, we have to correct for the increased hematocrit or PCV by using this formula. We multiply 60 with 4.5, divide by 100 minus patient PCV. So this will give the amount of blood collected for 0.5 ml of citrate solution. So how do we prepare the platelet poor plasma? We centrifuge the blood for 20 minutes at 2000 G, and we separate the supernatant, that is the platelet poor plasma. Now, one more thing we have to remember, when we are doing any coagulation test, we have to run the control samples along with a test sample daily. The second thing is that the test sample should always be run in duplicate to prevent any kind of errors. Hemolyzed samples should be discarded. Suppose we are not able to do the test on the same day due to some problem. In that case, we separate the platelet poor plasma and freeze it at -40 to -80 degrees centigrade in the deep freezer, and we can do the test on the subsequent days. So before proceeding for the individual test, this is just to give a gist of the coagulation pathway. We have the extrinsic pathway, which is activated by the tissue factor that causes the activation of factor 7, followed by activation of factor 10, and then the common pathway. This is the intrinsic pathway, where there is activation by the contact activators. Factor 12 gets activated to 12A, which activates factor 11, factor 9, and factor 10. And from here, this is a common pathway. Knowledge of this coagulation pathway is very important to understand the various tests that are done for the coagulation abnormalities. So initially, the prothrombin time. What is prothrombin time? It is the time taken by the citrated plasma to clot in presence of tissue factor and calcium. So basically, it tests the extrinsic pathway. So it will test the factor 7 along with the factor 5 and factor 10 of the common pathway. PT reagent or the thromboplastin has tissue factor and the phospholipids. So along with that, we take the patient plasma, the control plasma. We should have a water bath with test tubes and a stopwatch. So what we do, we take 100 microliter of the plasma in a test tube, keep it in the water bath for 37 degrees centigrade. We leave it there for 3 minutes. After 3 minutes, we add 0.1 ml pre-warmed thromboplastin. This thromboplastin has tissue factor, which will activate the extrinsic pathway. As soon as we add the tissue thromboplastin, we have to start the stopwatch and look for the clot formation in every 1 second by tilting the tube at a horizontal angle. And at the first site of the clot formation, we have to stop the stopwatch and look for the prothrombin time. We have to run the test in duplicate along with a control sample. So if there is difference between the control and test of more than 3 seconds, it means that the PT is prolonged. Normal range of the PT is 11 to 16 seconds. Again, it depends on the reagent used. ratio is calculated by dividing the patient PT by control PT. More than 1.2 is considered to be abnormal. Now, what is this INR? What happens that PT reagent has thromboplastin, and depending on the company providing the thromboplastin, different labs will have a different value of PT. So to make it uniform and to compare results from various labs, we have to have a standard. That is the INR, or International Normalized Ratio. So INR is calculated by dividing the PT of test, mean normal PT, to the power of ISI. ISI is International Sensitivity Index. It is provided with every reagent kit, and ISI of close to considered to be the best. So to standardize the PT value from various labs, we are using this INR and convert the PT to INR, and that is how it is reported. Next test is activated partial thromboplastin time. It is the time taken by the citrated plasma to clot in presence of negatively charged contact activators like silica kaolin, phospholipids, and calcium. Hence, we use the term activated. Why activated? Because we are using the activator. And why partial thromboplastin? Because there is just phospholipid, no tissue factors, and calcium. So it measures the clotting time of the plasma after activation of contact factors, but without adding the tissue thromboplastin. And APT gives the efficiency of the intrinsic pathway. We take 100 microliter of the test plasma, add 100 microliter of APTT reagent, and we keep it in a water bath for 5 minutes at 37 degrees centigrade. So what happens when we add APTT reagent to plasma? It causes the activation of the factor 12, which in turn generates the activated factor 11. But the reaction will stop at this level and will not proceed further in the absence of calcium. So after 5 minutes, we add 0.5 ml pre-warmed calcium chloride. And after this, the coagulation cascade will start further. And as soon as we add 0.5 ml calcium chloride, we have to start the stopwatch. And after 10 seconds, we have to tilt the stopwatch at 90-degree angle and check for the presence of any clot formation. The tube must be tilted in every 1 second to check for the clot formation. And as soon as we get the clot, we have to stop the watch and look for the time. Again, always we have to run the test in duplicate with the whole plasma. And both readings should not be differ by 2 seconds. So both the readings of test plasma, which we are running in duplicate, should not differ by more than 2 seconds. If they are differing by more than 2 seconds, we have to repeat the test. So again, for APTT, our lab has a reference range of 25 to 35 seconds. And difference of more than 6 seconds between the control and the patient plasma is considered to be abnormal and prolonged APTT. So now in hemophilia, APTT is prolonged. So once the APTT is prolonged, we have to check why APTT is prolonged. To check for that, we do the mixing study or the correction study. So it is done by mixing the patient plasma with the normal control plasma. So it is based on the principle that when we mix the patient's plasma with the normal plasma and correction of APTT occurs, that means there is a possible factor deficiency. If after mixing there is no correction of APTT, that means there were presence of inhibitors. So we need the following reagents. We can do with the normal control plasma followed by factor 8 deficient plasma, factor 9 deficient plasma. We can also use the adsorbed and aged plasma. So this is a basic principle of the mixing study where we take the patient's plasma with suppose factor level 0 and prolonged APTT. We take the normal plasma with normal factor level and normal APTT. We mix both of them in 1:1 ratio, and then we do APTT again on this mixture. If there is correction, that means there was factor deficiency. If there is no correction, that means there was an inhibitor which has inhibited the factor 8 which was present in the factor which was present in the normal plasma, or it could be due to presence of lupus anticoagulant. So this is the immediate mixing. Along with the immediate mixing, if there is correction of APTT on immediate mixing, we also do the incubated mixing. Now in incubated mixing, what we do is this is the patient's plasma, this is the normal control plasma. We take a third tube and mix these two, and we take a control sample, and all the tubes are incubated at 37 degrees centigrade for 2 hours. After 2 hours, we do APTT on this third tube, as well as we make a fifth tube where we mix the fresh mix of A and B tube. So if fresh mix is normal and the mixture in this third is giving a prolonged APTT, that means there is a time dependent. So I was explaining about the incubated mixing. Along with the immediate mixing, if there is correction of APTT, we have to do the incubated mixing. In incubated mixing, what we do, we take the patient's plasma, the normal pooled plasma, and a third tube where we take 1:1 mixture of both this sample and a control sample. We incubate all these tubes at 37 degrees centigrade for 2 hours. After 2 hours, what we do APTT on this third sample, and we take a fifth tube where we mix a sample from patient and pooled plasma in 1:1 ratio and do the APTT on that also. Now, if there is correction in APTT in fresh mix and there is prolonged APTT in incubated mix, that means there is presence of a time dependent inhibitor or delayed acting inhibitor. These kind of inhibitors are usually seen in factor VIII deficiency. So this table is showing the mixing study in a gist. Suppose APTT is prolonged, there is correction with the normal plasma. Factor VIII deficient plasma we are using, there is no correction, and with factor IX deficient plasma there is correction. That means it is factor VIII deficiency, because factor IX deficient plasma had factor VIII, so there was correction. Similarly, if there is correction with VIII deficient plasma and no correction with IX deficient plasma, it is factor IX deficiency. We can also use the adsorbed and the aged serum for the mixing. Adsorbed plasma is made by absorbing by the barium sulfate. So what this barium sulfate does is that it will absorb all the vitamin K dependent factors, that is 2, 7, 9, 10. So other than 2, 7, 9, 10, adsorbed plasma will have all the factors. Aged serum is prepared by keeping the serum for 24 to 48 hours. So it will have all vitamin K dependent factors along with factor 11, 12 and 13. So this table is showing the mixing study with aged and absorbed plasma. In factor VIII, there is no correction with the aged serum and there is correction with the adsorbed plasma. In factor IX deficiency, there is correction with the aged serum and no correction with the adsorbed plasma. If there is an inhibitor, there will be no correction at all. So once after mixing study, we get to know that it is a factor deficiency, we proceed with the specific factor assay. So for here, we make the serial dilution, or you can call it as doubling dilution of the plasma. It is based on the principle that serial dilution of plasma will reduce the prolonged APTT of a known factor deficient plasma. What happens with in 1:10 dilution, we take 100 microliter of patient plasma and 900 microliter of imidazole buffer. Now in 1:20, we take 500 microliter from first tube, add 500 microliter buffer. In 1:10 dilution, we take 500 microliter from second tube and add 500 microliter imidazole buffer. We have to take the test sample along with the control sample and prepare the doubling dilution of both the test and control sample and perform APTT on each and every tube. So after performing the APTT, we plot the result on the log graph paper. The test results on one linear scale and the control results on the other linear scale. Now the two lines that we get should be parallel to each other. They should not converge or diverge. So usually it is assumed that 1:10 dilution is assigned a factor value of 100% and 1:20 dilution is assigned a factor value of 50% and 1:40 is assigned a factor value of 25%. So from with this assay, we get the specific factor assay. Suppose there was no correction of the APTT after mixing, or if there is a delayed inhibitor, we proceed with the inhibitor screen. Inhibitor screen is the same which I had explained few minutes earlier by preparing the fresh mix and the incubated mix. If there is no correction, it is time dependent inhibitor. And if there is difference between the incubated mix and fresh mix of more than 8 seconds, then we consider inhibitor is present. Now we know that the inhibitor is present, so we have to proceed with the inhibitor assay. It is based on the principle that inhibitor to factor VIII is quantified by mixing the test plasma with a known amount of factor VIII and checking after an incubation the residual factor VIII activity of the test plasma. So by comparing the difference in factor VIII activity of patient, the incubation mixture and the control mixture, we get the idea of amount of inhibitor present. So we do the Bethesda analysis for this, and here this is the diagram. It will give a gist of the Bethesda analysis. So what we do, we take the patient plasma, We mix it with the normal pooled plasma in 1:1 ratio, incubator 37 degrees centigrade for 120 minutes. Simultaneously, we take a buffer mixed with the pooled normal plasma in 1:1 ratio, incubator 37 degrees centigrade for 120 minutes. We measure the residual factor 8 activity in both these samples, and we derive residual factor 8 activity by dividing the patient's plasma factor 8 activity with the control plasma factor 8 activity. Now, just to remind you one thing, that here I have shown in the diagram only 2 tubes, but actually we have to prepare 10 tubes in doubling dilution for both the test as well as for the control. One is starting from 1:2 dilution to 1:1024 dilution, to check even for the presence of small amount of inhibitors. We can use the Nijmegen modification of the Bethesda also. Here, instead of using the normal control plasma, we are using the buffered control plasma to check for any changes due to change in the pH. Otherwise, the procedure is the same. So whatever residual factor 8 activity we get, the levels are expressed in Bethesda unit. And one Bethesda unit inhibitor is defined as the amount of an inhibitor that will neutralize 50% of one unit factor 8 in normal plasma after 120 minutes incubation at 37 degrees centigrade. So this was about the Bethesda analysis. Thank you. With this, I'll end my presentation. If there are any doubts, they can be asked.
Thank you, madam.
If
Thank
there
you,
are
sir.
no queries, then we proceed to the Dr. Anshul Gupta. He is an associate professor. He is an associate professor in Sanjay Gandhi PGI with interest in hemato-oncology and in the coagulation disorders. I invite Dr. Anshul for his presentation.
Hello.
So, I invite Dr. Anshul Gupta. He is associate professor in Sanjay Gandhi PGI and has got an interest in hemato-oncology, pediatric hematology, and the coagulation disorders. He has got multiple papers in various journals, high-impact journals. May I present Dr. Anshul Gupta for his presentation?
Thank you, sir. At the onset, good afternoon, everybody. I would like to thank Dr. S.P. Verma and Mr. Vinay Manchanda for organizing this musculoskeletal workshop for hemophilic patients, and it's really a good initiative from his side. He has been conducting it for many years now. And I would also thank Ashutosh sir to be a constant member of this effort and taking keen interest in getting this organized. And to begin my talk, I would like to, I will be just speaking on the general aspects of hemophilia. I will be talking on the brief history that hemophilia was once considered as a royal disease and was first reported in the Queen Victoria in UK, the daughter of King Edward of Britain. And thereafter it used to be the fact that many people thought that it usually runs in the royal families, in the royal blood. And as you can see, that majority of the descendants of the royal family used to have the male members used to have this disease. But later on it was found that it is not just the royal family, but it is prevalent in our community also. So it is a X-linked recessive bleeding disorder with a frequency of 1 in 5,000 for factor 8 deficiency, which we call as hemophilia A. And for hemophilia B, it is slightly rarer than hemophilia A with 1 in 30,000 population. And there is also, this is also the fact that many patients of hemophilia we will encounter in day-to-day our OPD clinics or in clinical services when we don't find any family history of hemophilia in any of the family members. And we say that probably the spontaneous mutations may occur resulting in presenting in these patients. So hemophilia A constitute around 80% of the total hemophilia patient load, and hemophilia B constitutes around 20%. So as I say that it's an X-linked recessive inheritance. So what is X-linked recessive inheritance is that usually we have an unaffected carrier mother and an unaffected father. And because there is in the male, there is Y chromosome, so that the affected mother, carrier mother, passes on the defective gene to the son, and thus that son gets affected. So commonly we find that the son, the male member, the the son is the patient who is often hemophilic, and the mother, the females, are the carriers for the same. So as I previously said, that in 70% of the families, we can clearly find the history that some or the other family member is affected with hemophilia. But in 30%, we often get sporadic mutations and with no family history. So this is also quite common in hemophilia. So we have classified hemophilia into three categories: the severe hemophilia, moderate hemophilia, and mild hemophilia. So severe hemophilia with factor 8 levels less than 1%, moderate hemophilia with factor 8 level 1 to 5%, and mild hemophilia with factor levels 5 to 40%. The normal factor levels are usually 50 to 150%. And based on the factor levels, based on the factor levels in hemophilia, it can be divided into three categories, that is severe hemophilia, moderate hemophilia, and mild hemophilia. So severe hemophilia is a factor 8 levels less than 1%, moderate hemophilia with factor 8 levels 1 to 5%, and mild hemophilia with factor levels 5 to 40%. And these are the guidelines issued by the World Federation of Hemophilia. And based on these factor levels, we categorize the patients with the severity of bleeds. As we all know that the patients with severe hemophilia usually present with frequent spontaneous bleed, and almost on a monthly basis they present with a bleeding episode, either with hemarthrosis or muscle hematoma or muscle bleeds. And with moderate hemophilia, they present with this occasional spontaneous bleed, and mild hemophilies usually don't present as spontaneous bleeds. And we can see in this that in severe hemophilia, patients usually have around 36 spontaneous bleeds per year if they are not being provided with any factor concentrates prophylaxis, while moderate hemophilia with 5 spontaneous bleeds per year, and mild hemophilia no spontaneous bleed. The lifespan of patients with hemophilia in India has really been very poor in the last decade, and it is now improving slowly with the government funding and providing free factor concentrates to all our patients of hemophilia. Initially, it was found that this is an old data of 2007, where they have shown that in children less than 10 years, around 20% patients used to die because of some serious bleed and non-availability of factors, and majority of patients used to only 4% of the patients used to. So clinical signs of joint bleeding are, before clinical signs are noticeable, the patient may experience a warm tingling sensation, जो कि aura के नाम से कहते हैं. जो patients chronic hemophilics, those who are chronic hemophilics can usually find that they are just about to have a joint bleed, and the early signs include worsening pain and ache in the joint, tingling and bubbling in the joint, and decreased range of motion, and followed by a bleed which presents as limited movement, swelling, numbness, and skin around the joint feels warm. So this is why what is the main reason to control these fields? Because every bleed leads to joint damage. The immediate consequences are pain, swelling, and loss of mobility, thereby leading to long-term consequences like structural and inflammatory changes. Because when the blood is there in the joint, it incites a inflammatory process, thereby leading to chronic synovitis, target joint, and increased disability. So blood in the joint results in inflammation and hypertrophy of synovial membranes, increased vascularization, and a greater tendency to bleed. So it creates a vicious cycle once and leads to formation of a target joint. The diagnosis, Dr. Rashmi has given a quite elaborate talk, so I won't be touching on it. Just it is the history and physical examination, and the baseline test should be ABTT or PT APTT assay and a factor assay. So we need a factor report assay to be done to confirm the diagnosis. And the goals of therapy are, we should have these hemophilics give them a normal life expectancy, a good quality of life, and pain and disability free. And this is the, just I am showing a glimpse of hemophilia care, how it has evolved in our country. With initially in 1960s, the whole blood was given, followed by FFP, then cryoprecipitate came, then plasma derived CFCs came, then first generation recombinant clotting factor concentrates, and now presently we have the third generation recombinant clotting factor concentrates. These principles of care will be discussed by Dr. SP Verma in later talks. I'm just touching on it. I won't be discussing that. The principles of care includes the prevention of bleeding and joint damage, the prompt management of bleeding that includes the administration of clotting factor concentrates on time, management of complications that includes inhibitor development and prevention from viral transmission infections transmitted through blood products, and attention to the psychosocial health. And it's a multidisciplinary management, and it involves the hematologist, a geneticist to have a prenatal diagnosis of the disease, a surgeon, preferably an orthopedic surgeon, who may operate for deformed joints. A good laboratory, coagulation laboratory should be there for factor 8 assays and for screening for inhibitors. Good dental dentists to screen for dental caries in small kids, and a social worker, nursing care. So it needs a comprehensive care. It's not the single person who can manage these hemophilic patients alone. So that's the crux of hemophilia management. And with this, I would end my talk, and the elaborate discussion on various aspects of hemophilia management will be taken by Dr. S.P. Verma. Thank you.
Dr. Ashwal, thank you. You have given a very
Thank you.
comprehensive but a very precise and a good presentation regarding general information about the hemophilia. It has been a very scientific talk. Now we proceed on to the next speaker, who is Dr. Shailendra Verma. He is an associate professor in clinical hematology in Department of Clinical Hematology in KGMC. He is a very keen teacher as well as a researcher in this field. Now let me present Dr. Shailendra Verma for his dissertation on hemophilia, general aspects of management and replacement therapy. Dr. Shailendra Verma, please.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for the kind introduction. I'll be dealing with the treatment of bleeding in hemophilia, and initially I'll be dealing with the general management of hemophilia patients. So the outline of presentation will be, first of all, we have to manage the pain in hemophilia patients, so pain management. Then very important part is rest and immobilization of the extremity where the bleed has occurred. Then there are facility of home-based factor infusion, not with us, but at other parts of the world, this is also the facility which can be utilized. And then there are some of the adjunctive therapies and some of the drugs like tranexamic acids and caproic acid. So supportive care, as we can see that supportive care, these are very simple measures, but they are very, very important for management in hemophilia. So they can decrease the bleeding as well as they can reduce the damage which is happening at the time of bleeding. And feasibility is not a problem because most of the things which you see, they are available with us at home. And pain and increasing blood collection is the major concern, and these supportive care are basically to manage the pain and increasing blood collection by the time you get factor support. So coming to the management of pain, basically we use paracetamol, which is the safest drug for hemophilia patients. If the pain is not controlled with paracetamol, then we can go to paracetamol and tramadol combination, which we very commonly know as Ultracet, and paracetamol plus codeine combination, which are not routinely available. If the pain is not subsiding with this combination also, then we can take help of COX-2 inhibitors like celecoxib, which are, or sometimes even nimesulide, which are considered safe in hemophilia patients. If the pain is not responding to this also, then we have to go for morphine for severe pain conditions. So rest, other painkillers should be avoided, especially the non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs, group of drugs. Intramuscular injections of any time should be avoided, and should always be supplemented with other supporting measures. So we know the acronym of RICE, which is rest, ice, compression, and elevation. So our supportive care is basically based on these components. Currently, we know this acronym as PRICE. So PRICE is, we also add protection into this. So protection, rest, ice, compression, and elevation. So these are the major points to remember. So coming to protection, it means splinting. So we have to, the joint which has bled, we have to splint to keep it in the in a very static position so that there is no much bending and though there is no unwanted movement of the joint, because unwanted movement of the joint will lead to pain and more bleeding. Take two pieces of cane, a stick, wood, cardboard, or anything which is stiff and line one up on each side of the limb where it bends. So ultimately you have to support the limb so that there is no unwanted movement. Okay, if you have nothing rigid, then you can use the best alternative which is there with us. I'll show with you with the pictures. Two types of sprints are there. So like this, you can use the household things to make the joint more and more comfortable so that there is no much movement and there is minimum pain. These are the type of slings which can be used when there is a joint in the bleeding in the elbow joint. Rest is very, very important. With or without splinting, limits further injury and reduces the pain. So rest is very important, but again, prolonged bed rest again poses to a risk to muscle atrophy and contracture formation. So the rest should be for adequate time, but definitely followed by this, there should be active mobilization of the joint, so there is less and less muscle atrophy and there is less chance of contracture formation. Patient should be mobilized as early as pain is over and the patient is comfortable. Okay. Bleed is in the leg joint, so don't walk, use crutches or a wheelchair. Bleed is in the arm, then arm can be supported with a sling, as I just showed in the picture. However, it is important that patient maintain independence and continue to use uninjured joints and muscles to prevent weakness. So this is one of the very important picture which is showing that after a knee joint, if you put a pillow below the knee joint, it will be the most comfortable position for the joint, and then rest of the things I'll discuss. So keep the joint in the most comfortable position. Then application of ice, application of cold or ice packs is useful to decrease inflammation, and ice should be wrapped in a towel and should not be applied. So any ice should not be applied directly on the skin. It should be wrapped in a towel or handkerchief. And it is recommended that ice be applied for 20 minutes every 4 to 6 hours until swelling and pain decreases. So this has to be done multiple times in a day. So like this is one of the pictures of application of ice. Then there are ice packs. So you can crush the ice in small ice cubes, and then that can be wrapped in a towel so that no ice touches the skin directly, and then wet the towel. उसको पानी में डाल के towel को गीला कर लीजिए जिससे कि cooling जो है वो जल्दी हो सके, and इस जो area cool करना है उसको we can make it quickly. Place the ice on the top of and not under the affected area. जो भी affected area है उसको ऊपर रखें, and leave the ice in place for not more than 5 to 10 minutes, 3 to 4 times a day. Advantages क्या हैं? Advantages are that ice packs are inexpensive. हर घर में होते हैं, फ्रिज सबके पास होता ही है, and can be shaped easily to the affected body part and cool the area quickly. The disadvantage is that ice packs can be messy and the cold is sometimes not tolerated well by some of the patients. Gel packs भी होते हैं, gel packs are there. So what is the benefit and what are the disadvantages of gel packs? So gel pack का advantage है कि gel packs are less messy than ice packs बने हुए होते हैं, but disadvantage is some gel packs are not flexible enough to wrap easily around the arm or leg, and some are very heavy, so may not cool the affected area as quickly as the ice. What is the benefits of ice? Ice decreases pain, inflammation, and tissue damage. Okay, it also slows the blood flow to the bleeding area, so that platelet function and enzymatic reactions are also slowed down. Consequently, ice should be applied only after adequate factor replacement is administered. So in ideal situation, it should be done when you have given the factor to the patient, but we know that our patients are coming from remote areas and they are not able to get the factors immediately after bleed. So ice should be applied in them whenever they are having the bleed at home itself, and should not wait for factor replacement, but they should try to come for factor replacement as early as possible. Okay, so tips, there are some tips of using ice. 4 stages of sensation. So when we put ice on the skin wrapped in a towel or cloth, so there are 4 sensations which are happening. One is you feel cold, then you feel aching, then burning and numbness. Okay, so many people take off ice as the second and third stage, means when they are feeling some aching or burning, they just take away the ice, but it is better to try to leave it on until the area goes slightly numb, but not completely numb. So that should be a practical aspect which should be taken care of. Some cautions about using ice include that never use ice over a cut or skin that has been scraped. ठीक है, जहां स्किन में कट लगा हो या जहां पे स्किन छिली हुई हो वहां पे नहीं यूज करना है. नेवर लीव आइस डायरेक्टली ऑन द स्किन एंड बी केयरफुल इफ द पर्सन हैज पुअर सेंसेशन और पुअर सर्कुलेशन इन द एरिया. जैसे कि कभी कोई डीप मसल इंजरी हुई हो, वहां पे नर्व कंप्रेशन या वेस्कुलर कंप्रेशन की पॉसिबिलिटी हो, वहां पे आइस को यूज नहीं करना चाहिए बिकॉज सेंसेशन की प्रॉब्लम हो सकती है. कंप्रेशन इज अगेन जो कि हम वी नो दैट स्वेलिंग एंड इडिमा are indicative of blood filling the joint space and inflaming the surrounding tissue. So compression is very, very important. Compression bandage may help to reduce the soft tissue swelling, and although it has very little impact on bleeding, it cannot stop the bleeding, but again it gives a sense of comfort to the patient. Okay, form support using an elastic stocking or an elastic wrapping is important. This will help in minimizing swelling. Compression will not take away swelling once it is established, but it will provide some support to the injury and make it feel more comfortable. So this makes the patient feel more comfortable. How to put the elastic bandage? This is also very, very important. Always start at the extremity of the limb. जिस limb में जहाँ पे bleeding हुआ है वहाँ से शुरू करना चाहिए, and then you should go towards the central part of the body. Okay, overlap the bandage by 1/3, increasing to overlapping of 1/2 the bandage. हर बार जो बैंडेज हम लोग लपेटेंगे वो एक दूसरे वाली पहले वाली को थोड़ा कवर करते हुए जाए. शुरू में 1/3 कवर करे, बाद में हाफ तक कवर करते हुए, and with each turn around the limb. Stretch the bandage only slightly as you wrap. जब आप रैपिंग शुरू करेंगे, शुरू में थोड़ा टाइट रैपिंग होगी, लेकिन जैसे जैसे आप ऊपर बढ़ते जाएंगे वैसे वैसे रैपिंग थोड़ा सा लूजर होनी चाहिए, क्लोज टू द बॉडी. So close to the body, you have to be less tight, and at the near the site of bleeding, you should be slightly on the tighter side. Remove the bandage and re-wrap it often during the day. इसको कई बार दिन में करना है, ऐसा नहीं कि एक बार रैप कर दिया तो फिर 24 घंटे के लिए छोड़ दिया. But caution क्या रखना है? Do not apply compression if you think that bleed is causing pressure on nerves or blood vessels. अगर पेशेंट उस लिम्ब में कोई झंझनाहट या सुन्नापन कोई इस तरह की कंप्लेंट कर रहा है तो ऐसे में कंप्रेशन नहीं करना है, क्योंकि नर्व्स के जो सप्लाई है उस और ज्यादा बाधित हो सकती है और कॉम्प्रोमाइज हो सकती है. चेक द कलर एंड टेम्परेचर ऑफ फिंगर्स और टोज फ्रीक्वेंटली टू मेक श्योर दैट सर्कुलेशन इज नॉट बीइंग कट ऑफ. ओके, तो टाइम से फिंगर्स का कलर को एग्जामिन करना है. ऐसा नहीं हो कि वो उंगलियां नीली पड़ने लग जाएं या काली पड़ने लग जाएं. That indicates that the blood supply of the limb is compromised. So for that we have to frequently examine the fingers and the pulsation in that arm or leg. Then there is a role of elevation. So raising the injured part above heart level will decrease pressure. Okay, so ये concept है कि जहाँ भी bleeding हुआ है जिस joint में, उसको अगर हम बॉडी के लेवल से ऊपर उठाएंगे, पेशेंट लेटा हुआ है, अगर उसको हम ऊपर उठा के एलिवेशन करते हैं तो जो फिलिंग हो रही है ब्लड की उसमें भी कमी आती है. द अमाउंट ऑफ ब्लड विल बी मिनिमाइज्ड एंड द स्वेलिंग विल बी मिनिमाइज्ड, एंड इन दैट वे दिस विल बी हेल्पिंग योर पेशेंट. मेंटेन एलिवेशन also reminds patient to continue rest of the limb. So once your patient is in this position with the limb elevated, he is always reminding that okay, I have to be in this position for a defined period of time so that I can get better easily, and this will limit the movement also. Coming to the home based factor infusion, so this is one of the very important strategy. Ideally in ideal practice this should be there with all our patients, so that whenever they are having a sensation of aura, or whenever they are having acute bleed at home, they can get the first dose there itself, so that they can get the infusion within 2 hours of bleed. We know that after each bleed, if you get factors within 2 hours of the start of bleed, that is the best thing which we can do when we are talking about episodic treatment. So home-based factor infusion should ideally be there, but we are not having with us, this facility is not there with us, and so we are compromised in this way. So it can provide adequate time to reach primary care center. So you get one dose and then you can go to the primary care center. This should always be supported by adjunctive treatment, what I already mentioned. The acronym of PRICE should be followed. There are some of the drugs which are helpful in some of the specific condition, like desmopressin is one of the drug which increases the factor 8 and von Willebrand factor levels. Usually these are used in mild and moderate hemophilia, not working in severe hemophilia, and can be used by various routes, like it can be given subcutaneous injections, it can be given IV injection, or even intranasally also. And dose is 150 microgram per meter dose, or it is available in 4 microgram per ml for IV use also. And the dose for IV use is 0.3 microgram per kg body weight, IV or subcutaneous. And this can be expected to boost factor level to 3 to 6 fold. So you can see that with this injection, we can increase the factor levels to 3 to 6 fold. Okay, so this would be, if you want to take this drug, use this drug, this would be proven in that particular patient that it is increasing the factor levels. So initially you should prove this, and later on in later time periods, whenever he has a bleed, this can be used in that patient. Very important drug is tranexamic acid. We use it left and right in our patients. So this is one of the anti-fibrinolytic agent which inhibits the fibrinolysis so that your clot is stable. This inhibits activation of plasminogen to plasmin. So plasmin is the compound which is going to do the fibrinolysis, and that's why fibrinolysis is stopped, because plasmin is not being formed. This is useful in bleeding from skin and mucous membrane, especially hemophilia patients who are having bleeding from skin and mucosal membrane, like oral bleeding and epistaxis. This drug is very, very useful. And we can use it in many forms, like we can use it as an oral tablet, we can use it IV, you can make a paste of those tablets and apply on the bleeding area, you can use in the syrup form, or even you can use just take the tablets, make it crush it, and then put it in the liquid and use it as a gargle. So it can be used in multiple ways. So tranexamic acid is very, very important molecule. So with all this, we can see that the major supportive therapy options in bleeding with hemophilia patients are: one is pain control, which is very, very important. You should start with paracetamol or Ultracet, and if you're not able to control pain, then you can go to COX-2 inhibitors, like one of the example is Nucoxia. So these drugs can be used, and if even with this we are not able to use, then we can go for opioid group of drugs like morphine, pethidine. Those are the drugs which can be used for severe painful conditions. Second thing is that protection, rest, ice application, compression, and elevation. So I have discussed in detail that these are the major points which can be started even at home. The problem is that we think that if the bleed has occurred, then there is only way out is the factor infusion, and we are just rushing for that, but we are not doing all these in the components of care at home. If you do these at home and then move to your primary care center, then definitely you are stopping more and more bleeding to occur, and you are making your patient, your child, more comfortable when you reach at the hospital. So always try to use this in your practice at home, so that your patient is benefited of this techniques. And then there are some drugs like tranexamic acid, which I already explained. So this provides immediate pain relief and minimizes swelling. That is the purpose of giving support here in hemophilia. And further bleed will also be decreased till definitive treatment is available. So till you reach your primary care center or the specialized center where you are getting the factors. So with this, I think this is all about the supportive care in hemophilia.
Dr. Verma से एक क्वेश्चन आया है, why NSAIDs are not safer?
Okay, so why NSAIDs are not preferred for pain in hemophilia patients? So we know this the group of drugs which are known as non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs. These are anti-inflammatory drugs which are actually acting through various pathways, but in their pathway of action, they affect the platelet function. So platelet function is compromised in these patients. They can affect the platelet function, and we know that in hemophilia already the patients are having bleeding tendency. If we compromise the platelet function by using non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs, this will add to the tendency of bleeding, or even this can increase the severity of bleeding. So that is why we do not use NSAIDs in this treatment, because they are not COX-2 specific. Those drugs which are COX-2 specific and not affecting the platelet function, only those drugs are used. So we can use the opioid group of drugs, we can use paracetamol, we can use COX-2 inhibitors, but those drugs which are also having effect on COX-1, like the other NSAIDs, they are contraindicated in hemophilia management. Thank you.
Dr. Verma, आपके एक क्वेश्चन और भी आया है. Why ice is not applied on cut or wound?
The thing is that if you apply ice on cut on the injured part, then it will be more, painful and more damaging rather than benefiting. So that is why we do not apply on the cut part. If you apply in the cut part, it will be more,
Dr. Sanjay. He is a assistant professor in Department of Pathology and working in the human laboratory and the coagulation units. He has got a good exposure because he has worked as a SR in the clinical hematology, as well as he has worked in the Department of Pathology. So he has got a twin experience of both clinical as well as presentations in the laboratory aspects. Now he will be presenting with the genetic counseling of the hemophilia disorder. Dr. Sanjay Mishra, please.
The topic given to me today is hemophilia, the genetics and the genetic counseling. I'll be discussing that aspect of hemophilia. So we all know that hemophilia is an X-linked recessive trait. It's basically a factor VIII gene which is located on the X chromosome, and the common mutations are basically inversions, which is at the break point in intron 19, intron 22, and it is associated with severe hemophilia. And point mutations associated with mild and moderate hemophilias are also known. The estimated frequency is approximately 10,000, 1 in 10,000 births. And the number of people with hemophilia in the world is approximately 4 lakhs. Is the World Federation of Hemophilia's annual global survey. The hemophilia, which is factor 8 and factor 9 deficiency, is approximately in a ratio of 8 to 9:1. And hemophilia generally affects males because it is located on X chromosome and it is on the maternal side. And de novo spontaneous mutations can lead to hemophilia in 1/3 cases. So linkage analysis, the analysis of single nucleotide polymorphism or microsatellite variable number of tandem repeats in the factor VIII gene to track the defective X chromosome in the family. In view of considerable ethnic and geographical variations in the allele frequencies of these polymorphisms, it is necessary to establish the informativeness of these polymorphisms in different populations. And we can also do the direct mutational analysis, in which we identify the mutation of the factor 8 or factor 9 gene, and simple screening methods prior to sequencing provides a powerful and accurate tool of genetic diagnosis. We can also, to cut down the cost of mutational analysis, we can also do the targeted mutational analysis, like of the factor 8 intron 28 gene inversion can be assayed is described in nearly half of the hemophilias, with half of the families carrying severe hemophilia A, and lower values are reported in non-Caucasian populations. And factor 8 intron 1 gene inversion accounts for about 2 to 3% of severe hemophilia in Caucasian populations and in 7% in Asian populations. Now, mutation scanning or sequence analysis can be done in severe hemophilia also. It is important to know whether, what is the genotypic and phenotypic association in hemophilia A. Factor 8 gene mutation and other coexisting mutations, it has been long recognized that 10 to 15% of patients with phenotypically characterized with severe hemophilia are factor VIII gene mutation and their other coexisting mutational like mutations. So co-inheritance of thrombophilia mutation like protein C, protein S, factor V mutation analysis can also be present in hemophilia A patients. So the phenotypic variations can occur in hemophilia A patients when the mutations like protein C, protein S, and factor V lead-in mutations can coexist with hemophilia A. So genetic and non-genetic factors basically which influence the development of inhibitors in hemophilia A. The genetic factors are like HLA class 2 polymorphisms. There are ethnicity values also which affect the inhibitor development. The immunogenicity of an individual also affects the inhibitor development in hemophilia, and obviously the family history of inhibitors can also affect inhibitor development in hemophilia A patients. There are certain non-genetic factors also which affect hemophilia inhibitors in development of inhibitors in hemophilia A, like the immunological factors. If there is a preceding surgery or trauma, that can also lead to inhibitor development. The treatment, like what was the age of the first exposure to factor supplementation, modality of factor VIII infusion, whether it is continuous infusion or non-continuous infusions, intensive treatment with factor VIII concentrates, type of factor VIII which has been given, and changes of the factor VIII concentrates. So all these factors can affect the development of inhibitors in hemophilia A patients. So this, we all know that inheritance of hemophilia A is X-linked. So this is a pedigree which shows the inheritance of hemophilia. So if a male, this is a male which is affected male. So if a male is affected, so the next generation, male is affected in the next generation. If the male is affected and the female is normal, so in the next generation, generation 2, the females are carriers and all the males will be normal. But in the third generation, the hemophilia will again manifest and all the carriers will transmit their disease, that is hemophilia A, which will be affected. Females are normal, 50% females will be normal and 50% females will be carriers. In the generation 4, again it is transmitted likewise. So here again depicted in a different format. Yeah. So if the father is affected, and the mother is normal, so it is the daughters will be carriers. Whereas when a mother is a carrier and father is unaffected, then the mother can transmit the disease to the sons which will be affected. Whereas the sons, 50% of the sons will be affected and the 50% will be normal because one of the chromosome is having the disease. The female is the carrier, and where daughter will be a carrier again. So the genetic counseling, what is the role of a genetic counseling? Basically, a genetic counseling is for any disease which is transmitted genetically, is the process of helping people to understand and adapt to the medical, psychological, and familial implications of genetic contributions to the disease. So this is the only way by which we can prevent the disease transmission to the next generation. So this is one of the important tools of prevention. Like in thalassemia also, we have this genetic counseling, and we have had examples in which the entire country has been, prevented with the disease of thalassemia. So same concept here in hemophilia also. We need to interpretation of family and medical histories to assess the chance of disease occurrence or recurrence. Now we need to education about inheritance. What is the inheritance pattern of disease? What are the different testing modalities? What is the management of the disease? What are the things by which we can prevent the disease inheritance? Resources and research. Counseling to promote informed choices and adaptation to the risk of conditions. So genetic counseling is very important in hemophilia. So we all know that in the inheritance of hemophilia can be affected by consanguineous marriages, a carrier female and a hemophiliac female. You know, the female can be affected with hemophilia in the cases of consanguineous marriage, or when there is a skewed inactivation of the X chromosome. Normally the females are carriers only, or whether when there is Turner syndrome, that is only one X chromosome is present. Genetic counseling. Who is the authority to do the genetic counseling? A trained genetic counselor is limited in the actually a genetic counselor is a proper trained individual who should impart genetic counseling. But in the countries like ours, we have less number of genetic counselors. So we can have trained genetic counselors who is limited in the developed countries. So it is the role of hemophilia treatment centers, HTCs, and comprehensive care team to provide genetic counseling. This necessary information will help patients to make informed decisions. So a genetic counselor is the appropriate person to do the genetic counseling. But in the cases where these expert people are not available, then the nurses can be trained, or psychologists or the social workers can be trained, or the hematologist can impart the duties of genetic counselor. And we should give them education of disease, the psychosocial assessment we should do, and we should also give them the education of reproduction, decision making, and risk assessment and genetic testing. What are the different components of genetic counseling? I will be discussing this again. I have different subheadings, so I will be discussing about contracting, the information gathering, risk assessment, education, psychosocial assessment and counseling, and then final individual case management. I'll be discussing each topic in later slides. Who are the carriers? Basically, the expected mean plot carriers in the cases of carriers, expected mean clotting factor levels of hemophilia is 50% of the normal levels. Most carriers are basically asymptomatic. Carriers with the clotting factor levels of 40 to 60% of the normal may have sometimes bleeding tendencies. Most common manifestations are menorrhagia and bleeding after medical interventions, because these are the females most of the time who are carriers. Immediate female relatives like mothers, sisters, and daughters of a person with hemophilia should have their clotting factor levels checked from time to time, especially prior to any invasive interventions, childbirth, or if they are symptomatic. Now we have obligate carriers, or we have possible carriers. So obligate carriers are here we can assess their family history. Through family history, we can assess whether these individuals will be the obligate carriers or they will be a possible carrier. So all daughters of a father who is a hemophiliac will be an obligate carrier, because X chromosome from the father will go to the daughters. So they will be obligate carriers. Mothers of one son with hemophilia and who have at least one other family member with hemophilia. So that proves that it is not a chance mutation. It is transmitted through it has been inherited through their family members. So mothers of, and the third one is mothers of one son with hemophilia and who have a family member who is a known carrier of the hemophilia gene, like a mother, a sister, a maternal grandmother, aunt, niece, or cousin. Or mothers of 2 or more sons with hemophilia. A mother who is having 2 or more sons with hemophilia, that means the mother is a obligate carrier. The possible carriers are all daughters of a carrier will be having X chromosome from their parents and they will be the carriers. Mothers of one son with hemophilia but who do not have any other family members who have hemophilia can be a possible carrier. And sisters, mothers, maternal grandmothers, aunts, niece, and the family female cousins of carriers can be the possible carriers of hemophilia gene. So the genetic counseling, genetic testing, and prenatal diagnosis is important. So the genetic testing for carrier status should be offered to at-risk female family members of people with hemophilia. DNA-based mutational analysis can be done for specific mutation analysis for mutation detection and identifies the carriers, and prenatal diagnosis can be planned. And the genetic counseling is key to helping people with hemophilia and their family. Genetic counseling is key to helping people with hemophilia and their family. Prenatal diagnosis is usually offered when you are about to make a decision of termination of pregnancy, would be considered if an affected fetus is identified. Also can be done to help the family prepare and to plan the delivery. Prenatal diagnosis can be done by CVS sampling. It is best done between the 9 to 14 weeks of gestation, and it can also be done by amniocentesis at 15 to 17 weeks of gestation. For carriers who are of low factor levels, that is less than 50, hemostatic support may be required to prevent the maternal bleeding, and feto-maternal hemorrhage is at risk. Anti-D for RH mother should be given. This is the same thing again, same slide. So inhibitors who are prone to develop inhibitors. So there are risk factors for inhibitor developments, like it can be patient related or it can be treatment related. So treatment related is, I've already discussed this in my earlier slide, so I think I'll skip this. But there are different mutations which inhibitor prevalence according to the type of mutation in hemophilia A. So these are the different types of mutations, like, large deletions, nonsense mutations, and there are missense mutations. So large mutations, the relative incidence of development of inhibitors is 3%, whereas nonsense mutation, the relative incidence is approximately, the relative mutation, large deletion, the prevalence of this mutation is 3%, nonsense mutation is 9.3%, and intron 22 inversion is more prevalent, 35.7%, whereas missense mutation is 38.2%. So the inhibitor prevalence is more in cases of multi-domain or large mutations, whereas the prevalence is less in the cases of missense mutations and non-C1, C2 domain mutations, like 3% prevalence development of inhibitors in these individuals. So the genetic counseling session map. So these are the headings. In contracting, these individuals should, provide genetic counseling, should synthesize the following, often brief conversations with the patients and with the people who are coming for counseling, make adjustments where necessary, and use it to develop a tentative plan. That is, they should first introduce themselves properly. They should manage the time management. They should tell them that what is the session all about, how much time it is going to take. They should assess the understanding of the population who is coming for genetic counseling and propose topics. What are the different topics they will be discussing and what are the different things they will be telling. So they should tell those individuals. Then they should inform the gathering. That means they should obtain the clinical and non-clinical information about the patient, and they should make critical decisions of the counseling session according to the information they have gathered. They should do the risk assessment. Risk assessment in the form of personal, medical, and family histories, which is extremely crucial for risk assessment. The individuals providing genetic counseling should synthesize the information gathered to assess the risk of being a carrier or a disease. They should do the proper education. They should tell the individual about the natural history of the disease, or that is of hemophilia A. What is the inheritance type? What are the different type of testing options which is available to them and when to get them tested? What are the different genotype, phenotype correlations? What are the different mutations which we have assessed, and what will be the different phenotypic variations in these individuals? And also they should educate the individual about their family planning options. They should also assess the psychological assessment and tell those individuals of different psychosocial aspects and give them proper counseling. And then finally, case management, individual case management. Assess individual problems of the hemophilia A patients and give them adequate care. So to conclude, I think the genetic counseling is a complex and essential part of comprehensive care for patients and families with a diagnosis of hemophilia. It focuses on educating patients and families about the clinical presentation, underlying genetics and familial implications of hemophilia, while being aware of and adapting to factors that may influence patient perception. Genetic counselors provide a supportive environment for all patients and families to explore the information, make informed decisions, and work through evoked feelings and emotions. And although genetic counselors have a specialized training to facilitate these process, other healthcare providers may assume the role of genetic counseling. Thank you.
Dr. Anshul Gupta, you question आया है. What is the current status of prophylactic aspect versus on-demand treatment in India and UP?
In UP, last year and this year, we have made some plans to start prophylaxis in a limited way. Four centers were identified in our meetings, and we planned that at least 20 patients from each center should be taken in for this prophylaxis program. And for that, we talked to the higher authorities also, and they were ready to try it as a pilot program in UP for starting prophylaxis, especially for those children who are less than 5 years of age, very young age children, because we know that those are the ones who are most benefited if they are getting prophylaxis for that. But I think after that, this COVID period and this lockdown period has affected the plans very strongly. So in near future, probably we are going to start prophylaxis in UP in a very limited fashion at some centers. And once we get success with this, because we are planning to start with the low dose factor prophylaxis, which will be almost 10 to 20 units per kg body weight, not as high doses as in Western countries where it is 20 to 40 units per kg body weight. So we'll be doing this in the coming time, and we think maybe if not this year, maybe next year we'll be able to start this in a pilot project way, and then we'll try to expand it.
Dr. Shailen Verma is going to talk on management of in hemophilia factor replacement and factor
Yes.
replacement.
Thank you.
You kindly start.
So now I'll be talking about the most important part of hemophilia management, that is the factor replacement therapy. So as you know, as I talked about the adjunctive treatment and supportive treatment of hemophilia, once you started this supportive treatment for hemophilia at home, you should make a hurry so that you can reach in time at the centers which are having the factor facility, so that you can get the factor in as less time as possible, because time is the money here, and if you lose time, you lose your joint, you lose your you get more and more bleeding and more damage to your joint. So we should always try to get factors as early as possible. So but only getting the factor is not enough. If you see the principles of care in hemophilia, basically the principle is to either prevent or treat. So ideally we should try to prevent, but if not, then at least treat bleeding with deficiency clotting with clotting factors, and as early as possible. Whenever possible, we should use specific factor concentrates, and it should not go for plasma and FFP and other things. We should try to get specific factor concentrate most of the time. And the ideal management of hemophilia is basically in the comprehensive care center. That is for the best management. But yes, having said this, the factor replacement therapy can be done at centers which are not giving comprehensive care, because comprehensive care is not possible. Even if you see the worldwide scenario, comprehensive care is possible only at 20% of centers. 80% of centers are not able to give comprehensive care, but it does not mean that smaller centers cannot give care to hemophilia patients. They can at least provide adequate doses of factors in within time, so that the patient can be benefited. And acute bleed should be treated as quickly as possible. I have already stressed on this point, preferably within 2 hours of bleed. And very important point to remember for all the hemophilia centers running in UP and in rest of the part of India also, that if there is any doubt about bleeding, don't argue with the patient, just treat it. If you have the availability of factor, just treat it in any case of doubt. Recognition of tingling sensation or aura by the patient is a very important criteria and very important point to say that this patient is going to bleed or just started bleeding in the joint, and that sensation can be felt by some of the patients who are chronic having this problem for a longer time, and they know this in a very well way. So we should respect that, and we should start giving factor if they are complaining of such problems like tingling sensation in a joint and having sensation of aura. Speedy assessment is very, very important. Life threatening bleeds like CNS bleeds, if there is a brain bleed, treat immediately. Even don't go for a detailed history also, and don't go for any radiological investigation. First treat it, and then you do whatever you want to do in the form of investigations. All patients should carry easily accessible identification, so that there is no delay in knowing whether you are hemophilia A or B or what is your status. So all these are the patient responsibilities also, that when they are coming to hemophilia care centers, they should carry their identification card, their booklet with them, so that the doctor there is not confused and they can get the proper factors. Okay. Along with that, very important things are about the veins. So veins must be treated with much care. Okay, we should use as thin cannula as possible, which can be sufficient for providing factors. 23 to 25 gauge, very thin butterfly needles are they are enough for providing the factor, because the injury with these needles will be very, very less. Never go for a cut down into a vein except in emergency, and apply pressure for 3 to 5 minutes after venipuncture. Okay, but because sometimes there are chances of hematoma formation, venous access devices should be provided, should be avoided in these patients. These are the devices which are used in Western world in some situations where the patients are long-term prophylaxis, but for episodic treatment, venous access devices should be completely avoided. Adjunctive therapies can be used, as we have already discussed. So as Dr. Anshul has also mentioned about this comprehensive healthcare or comprehensive care team, so basically this is required to provide good quality of life while decreasing morbidity and mortality in these patients and to provide optimal care. And optimal care cannot be provided by one person. Optimal care will be provided by a team, and the priority of that team is to prevent the bleeding, prompt management of bleeding, management of complications, whether these are surgical complications, whether they are the development of inhibitors, whether there are any infectious complications. So you have to have a multidisciplinary team. And again, attention to psychosocial health and the physiotherapy, that also cannot be forgotten. So these are the very, very important aspects of management of hemophilia. So comprehensive care team should have a medical director, which is a pediatrician or hematologist or a clinical physician who is taking care of hemophilia. There should be a nurse coordinator, which has a very, very important role in management of hemophilia patient. Musculoskeletal expert, physiotherapist, occupational therapist, orthopedists. These are important in management of hemophilia. Laboratory specialist to get the proper diagnosis of hemophilia as well as inhibitors. And then psychosocial expert, preferably by a social worker or psychologist. And in addition to that, a genetic counselor. If you have the facility of that, a genetic counselor can be very, very helpful in prevention of hemophilia in society in general. Treatment of bleeding. We know that factor concentrates are available. Earlier, we are using plasma-derived factors, which can still be used. But now we are having recombinant factor VIII and plasma-derived factor IX by government supply for our patients. And in recombinant also, we know that we have the first generation, second generation, and third generation, factor VIII. Now, currently, we are using third generation factor VIII. And there are also provision of long-acting factor VIIIs, which are not for routine use in our practice, but these are very, very useful because you can reduce the frequency of infusions. Okay, none of the above is preferred over each other, so all are equally effective, and that is why with any type of factor concentrate which is available with you, you can go for the factor infusion in these patients. Viral inactivation by heat treatment and solvent treatment. So these are the methods to inactivate the virus in the plasma. So these are the most important processes for safety of plasma-derived factors, and which is rigorously used for all plasma-derived factors, so that the chances of transmission of infections in the patients who are receiving these factors are not there. So very important aspect of factor replacement therapy is dose calculations. So this is something very, very basic which we all should know, how to calculate the factor dose. And if you are giving the calculated dose, proper dose in proper schedule, then your patient will be benefited in the best way. Otherwise, your patient may have to suffer. So for factor VIII, we can see the formula is that you take the body weight of the patient and you multiply it by the desired factor rise which you want. I'll show the table also later on, but what is the factor rise you want? And this you have to decide depending on the type of bleed which patient has presented with. And then you have to divide this by 2 or you multiply it by 0.5. So body weight into desired factor rise divided by 2. So this is the factor dose which will be calculated. And as we know that half-life of factor VIII is 8 to 12 hours, so you have to give it twice a daily administration. So the same dose which you have calculated, you will give it the same dose in the morning, and the same dose has to be repeated in the evening. And we know that 1 unit per kg body weight of factor VIII, when it is given, it raises the factor level by 2%, and for that only this division of 2 is there. So body weight into desired factor rise divided by 2. This 2 comes from this concept that 1 unit per kg body weight raises level by 2%. For factor IX, the formula is even simpler: body weight multiplied by desired factor rise. So with this you can calculate. I will show you the examples also for this, because this is the most important part of factor replacement therapy. Half-life of factor IX is, this concept should be very clear, that half-life of factor IX is only 18 to 24 hours. So it is just double of factor VIII, and that is why factor IX is given once a day. Factor IX should be given once a day. 1 unit per kg body weight of factor IX raises factor level by 1%, and that is why there is no division by 2, which was there in factor VIII dose calculation. So this is the example: a severe hemophilia A patient with a joint bleed. Let us assume that he has presented with a knee joint bleed. So 20-year male with factor level less than 1%. So he's a severe hemophilia. Dr. Ansul has already told you in his presentation, factor level less than 1% is severe hemophilia. So 20-year male, severe hemophilia, weight is 50 kg and requirement of factor rise is 40 to 50%. So where this comes from? This comes from the formulas that there are, World Federation of Hemophilia has defined the percentage rise which is required in different type of bleeding. So for a joint bleed, we need to raise the factor levels to 40 to 50% because this is the safe level where bleeding can be stopped. So we want to rise 40 to 50%. So the formula is weight into the percentage rise which you want divided by 2. So weight is 50 kg, percentage rise which you want is 40%, divided by 2 means 2000, divided by 2 means 1000 units. So this 1000 unit is the single dose of factor 8 which should be given to this patient with a joint bleed, and this should be given twice till response is there, means whether pain or discomfort resolves. So 1000 units morning, 1000 unit evening till the pain or discomfort resolves. And this is very important to remember that in joint bleeds, usually pain resolves in 1 to 2 days, means 2 to 4 doses. By 2 to 4 doses, the joint pain and discomfort resolves. If it is not resolving, then probably your patient is not responding to your factor infusion. And in those conditions, you should see whether you have to rise the factor above 40 to 50%, maybe you should go to 70-80%. And the second thing is that you should also look for a presence of inhibitors because your patient is not responding to the usual treatment. This is a case of hemophilia B. Again, I have taken one example who has presented with joint bleed again, 20-year male, factor level less than 1%. So here weight is 50 kg, factor rise again is required is 40 to 50%, weight into rise, there is no need to divide by 2, so 15 to 40, 2000 units. And this should be given once a daily dose till response is there. So you can see that factor 8 and factor 9, if you see the daily doses are same, but in factor 8, it is divided in 2 parts, 1000 unit morning, 1000 unit evening. But for the same patient, factor 9, 2000 units should be given at the same time once a day. So I think with these two case scenarios, it is very clear, but you should keep in mind that this is for joint bleed. If your patient comes to you with CNS bleed, brain bleed, then the required factor rise will be 100%. And there you have to put 100 here so that you can calculate the doses. So this is just an example for this. And as I was mentioning regarding the World Federation of Hemophilia, the guidelines in each type of bleeding, how much desired factor level is there. For a joint bleed, it is 40 to 60%. But for a iliopsoas bleed, which is a muscle bleed and severe type of muscle bleed, it should be 80 to 100% initially and later on 30 to 60%. Okay. For a CNS bleed, you can see 80 to 100% initially. And then later on after 7 days, you can maintain up to 50%. So these are the values which should be there on your table or in your table, in your drawer. You take it out and just see what is the clinical condition. And based on that, you calculate the factor doses and give it to the patient. Okay. So other options are cryoprecipitate and FFP. These should only be used when you do not have the specific factor concentrate. Okay. Treatment of specific hemorrhages or joint bleeds. What is the goal? To stop the bleeding as soon as possible. Should ideally occur as soon as the patient recognizes the aura. Clinical suspicion is enough. X-ray and ultrasound are not immediately required. You can do it later on to confirm, but first give the factor, and price I have already discussed. Arthrocentesis. So is it required? This can be required in very, very limited situations, very specific situation. Ideally, it should not be performed in all patients. Okay. So if the bleeding is tense, painful joint, which is not showing any improvement even after 24 hours of factor replacement, or joint pain cannot be alleviated, means joint pain is very severe, not responding, evidence of neurovascular compromise is there, or unusual increase in local or systemic temperature, means there is some possibility of some underlying infection. Okay, septic arthritis. So in such situation, arthrocentesis can be tried by the specialist, but it should always be done under cover of factor concentrate. It should never be done without factor concentrate because it can further increase the bleeding. Muscle bleeds. Any muscle of the body can be affected by this. It can be due to direct trauma, or sometimes it can be sudden stretch, but it can be spontaneous also. Okay, and early management is very, very important to prevent contractures, rebleeding, and formation of pseudotumors. Okay, muscle bleeds with risk of neurovascular compromise has to be recognized. Like if there is iliopsoas muscle bleed, for example, I am telling one example, iliopsoas muscle bleed is there is risk of femorocutaneous, crural and femoral nerve palsy. So you can have quadriceps palsy, you can have dysanesthesia or loss of sensation at the medial aspect of thigh. So there can be nervous compromise because the nerves travel through these muscles in the depth of these muscles. Neural nerves and vascular bundles can be compromised in muscle bleeds. Okay, factor infusion should be started in these patients. If there is neurovascular compromise, then you have to maintain higher level for higher number of days, 5 to 7 days. Along with that, price is required. Monitor continuously for neurovascular compromise or compartment syndrome. Hemoglobin level should be checked, and graded physiotherapy should be started once pain subsides. Iliopsoas bleeds, you know, this is one of the very important type of bleeding. This is a unique presentation. There is pain in lower abdomen, groin, or lower back. Basically, sometimes this mimics like acute appendicitis. Okay, paresthesias in the medial aspect of the thigh is there, and signs of femoral nerve compression should be there. And we have got few patients who have got aspirated. You know, they have put the needle in the abdomen to see what is happening, and then the blood is coming, and then it continues. There, some of the patients have come with a drain put in that area, and they are continuously bleeding. So this type of mistakes should not be done. If there is any doubt, if the patient is already diagnosed, then think of iliopsoas bleed and send to the specialist center. And if the patient is not diagnosed, still you should go for radiology first and see what is happening, and then send to the specialist for workup. Immediately we should have to raise the factor levels and maintain it for at least 1 week or longer. Patients should be ideally hospitalized, should be kept under observation. For control of pain, strict bed rest is required. Here you cannot move in 1 or 2 days. At least 1 to 2 weeks bed rest is required. You should confirm the diagnosis with CT and MRI, and limitations of the patient activity till pain improves. The second most serious type of bleed is central nervous system bleed or head trauma. It's a medical emergency. Treat first before evaluating the patient even. Okay, all post-traumatic head injuries, confirmed or suspected, and significant headaches, even significant headaches, severe headache, recent onset, new onset severe headaches should also be treated as intracranial bleeds or brain bleeds. Okay, and then later on you go for whatever radiological investigation like CT, MRI you want, but do not wait for these investigations and reports to come. Immediately raise the patient factor levels to 100%. You have to maintain a higher level for 10 to 14 days, and then slowly you can come down on the doses. And in these patients, even you can try for going for secondary prophylaxis, which can be a short term 3 to 6 months as indicated. Okay, immediate medical evaluation and hospitalization is required. The second aspect of factor replacement is prophylactic factor replacement. Factor prophylaxis in hemophilia, as one of our the participants has asked the question also. So this is the ideal situation worldwide in Western world. This is the strategy which is being followed, and this is the ideal way. So there are 3 types of prophylaxis. One is primary prophylaxis. Primary prophylaxis means when the kid is having first bleed, you have to identify that he is suffering with hemophilia, and after first bleed he should not have a second bleed. You should immediately start prophylaxis, which is regular transfusion of factors at least 2 to 3 times a week, so that the adequate factor level is maintained in the body and the patient does not bleed at all. But this is not feasible in our scenario. Our patients are even being diagnosed after 4, 5, 7, 10 bleeds. So that scenario is not for us. Secondary prophylaxis is after a second joint bleed, 2 joint, 3 joint bleeds have occurred, and then you are starting, that is secondary prophylaxis. But most of the time what we are dealing with is tertiary prophylaxis, where already there is joint disease has started, joints are deformed. So we are talking about giving prophylaxis to those patients, but ideal situation is the primary prophylaxis. And what we are doing is the topmost one, that is episodic treatment. Whenever there is a bleed, you come get factor. This is episodic treatment. But in CNS bleeds and those patients who are having target joints, short-term prophylaxis for 2 to 3 months can be very, very effective in reverting the target joints to the non-target joints, and that should also be considered. So factor prophylaxis, what is the concept? Concept of factor prophylaxis is, as Dr. Anshul has already mentioned, that if the factor level is more than 1% in body, your the patient is not going to bleed spontaneously. Usually they will bleed with trauma, but spontaneous bleeding will be very, very less. And this is the basic goal of therapy. So you give factor so that your patient is maintaining more than 1% and he is not having any spontaneous bleeds. That this is the goal of the factor prophylaxis. So we know, as I mentioned, Western world, there are two protocols, Malmo and Utrecht protocol. They use very high doses of factors, 25 to 40 unit per kg body weight, 3 times a week. That is a very, very, for cost constrained countries like India, this is not feasible. So what we have done, we started even at Jimmer during my DM, we started low dose factor prophylaxis for severe hemophilia patients twice a week, 10 unit per kg body weight, very, very low doses. And we could see that this paper was published in Hemophilia also, where we could see that 85 to 90% of bleeds can be stopped completely with only this much of low factor, that is 10 unit per kg twice a week, not a thrice a week and not at very high doses. Okay. And then we have done prophylaxis with long acting factor 8 also, which was provided to us with World Federation of Hemophilia for some time. And this was a 4-month observational study where 4 months we gave the factor prophylaxis and 4 months without factor prophylaxis, only on episodic treatment. And we saw that during prophylaxis, 89% of bleeds could be stopped during prophylaxis. So definitely this is very, very feasible, but the only thing is the cost. And that is why we are talking about starting it at the lower doses in limited number of patients in a pilot trial. And if we could show this, that this is very, very effective in our patients, to the government, probably the government will allow us to start prophylaxis for at least those kids who are less than 10 years of age. Short-term prophylaxis, I've already mentioned that this is for those patients who are having target joints or CNS bleeds, and you can give factors in a regular way for 4 to 8 weeks so that they could be benefited. So the take-home message with this presentation is avoid intramuscular injections and non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs. Take care of the veins. Veins are very, very important. So we should take care of the veins. Use as thin cannula as possible. Factor prophylaxis is although the standard of care worldwide in Western world, but we are basically based on currently on the episodic treatment. Episodic treatment of bleeds should be early and adequate. So adequate means you should calculate the factor doses for particular patient for particular type of bleeding, and that dose should be delivered to that patient. Okay, patient symptoms should be respected. You do not need to confirm everything with ultrasound or X-ray. If patient is saying that I am having this type of feeling, this pain, this thing, his symptoms should be respected and the treatment should be given based on that particular joint. Target joints should be managed with short-term prophylaxis so that they can be again converted to non-target joints, because these patients, they keep on presenting twice a week or sometimes thrice a week. So it's very difficult to manage these patients. Adequate rest and early initiation of physiotherapy is very, very important. You take adequate rest and then start physiotherapy as early as possible, because the chances of contracture and joint deformities are there. So you should take this physiotherapy very, very seriously. And that is the whole concept of this, program of MSK, for physiotherapists. So I would like to thank you here, and any questions if it's there.
Thank you. Dr. Saab, एक question आया है यहाँ पर. What is the mutation? That is the main cause.
What are the causes of? See, the cause of hemophilia is the mutation in factor 8 and factor 9 gene that Dr. Sanjay has already mentioned. But what are the causes of these mutations are not known. These mutations are spontaneous. They spontaneously develop. We do not know what is the predisposition, who will develop these mutations, as there are almost 40% of mutations are spontaneous. They spontaneously develop. But the cause why these mutations are developing is not known. As we see in all other inherited conditions, all other cancers and all, that there are mutations which are responsible for those diseases. But why these mutations are developing, what is the susceptibility, why these mutations are developing in that particular individual cannot be predicted.
डॉक्टर साहब एक अगला क्वेश्चन और है, what are the conservative management in case of life threatening bleeds?
So in life threatening bleeds, it means we are talking about two bleeds which are life threatening. One is CNS bleed, and second thing is if there is any abdominal bleed, intra-abdominal bleed or SWAS bleed. So in these conditions, conservative managements are not much effective. because whatever we have talked about the price and all, but if you have the factor for home based infusion, or if you have the facility and you can use some of the drugs like I mentioned, tranexamic acid and all, but these are not going to help you in a very big way. You have to reach to your primary center where you can get the factors as early as possible. That is the only way out for life threatening bleed, and the patient has to be hospitalized and has to be managed intensively and given the factors in a proper doses for a proper duration of time. So conservative management in those situations will not be very effective and not be very fruitful.
सर अगला क्वेश्चन आया है, how we have to calculate the doses in case of low doses prophylaxis.
So low dose prophylaxis, you don't have to calculate the dose. The formula I have given for low doses, we use 10 unit per kg body weight. So that is a straight away formula, 10 unit per kg body weight or 20 unit per kg body weight. So your patient is 20 kg, means you have to give 200 units. If your patient is 40 kg, you have to give 400 units. If you are going to give prophylaxis with 20 unit per kg body weight, then it will be, if for a 40 kg patient, it will be 800 units. So it's a very simple formula, just units per kg body weight.
सर अगला एक और क्वेश्चन है, इंटरनल ब्लीडिंग को कैसे पता लगाएंगे?
इंटरनल ब्लीडिंग्स में देखिए ऐसा है कि इंटरनल ब्लीडिंग में जो जॉइंट्स के अंदर और मसल्स के अंदर ब्लीडिंग होगी वो तो आपको पता चल ही जाएगा, बिकॉज देयर विल बी पेन, स्वेलिंग, उसके कारण आपको पता चल जाता है. जो इंटरनल ब्लीडिंग एब्डोमेन के अंदर ब्लीडिंग हो रहा है या अगर जो है ब्रेन के अंदर ब्लीडिंग हो रहा है, तो ब्रेन के ब्लीडिंग में जैसे मैंने बताया कि सबसे पहली चीज है हेडेक, सिर दर्द शुरू हो जाएगा और ये अचानक होगा जनरली मोस्ट ऑफ द केसेस में. उसके साथ साथ आपको जो है उल्टी और मितली महसूस होना, ये चीजें होंगी. और साथ में जो पेशेंट है उसका हो सकता है शरीर का कोई हिस्सा जो है धीरे धीरे काम करना बंद कर दे या उसमें कमजोरी आने लगे, और धीरे धीरे अगर बहुत ज्यादा ब्लीडिंग होगी तो मरीज बेहोश भी हो सकता है, झटके भी आ सकते हैं, उसको सीजर्स भी आ सकते हैं. तो ये सारे अगर फीचर्स हैं तो आप सोच के चलिए कि भाई ये ब्रेन ब्लीड हो सकता है. अगर किसी भी हीमोफीलिया पेशेंट को सीवियर हेडेक है जो सडन ऑनसेट एकदम से शुरू हुआ है, तो उसको ये मानना चाहिए कि ये ब्रेन ब्लीड हो सकता है, अनटिल अनलेस कि उसको हम प्रूव कर दें सीटी स्कैन करा के. फैक्टर लगवाए एक बार, 100% डोज मेंटेन हो, उसके बाद सीटी स्कैन कराए, देखे कि ब्लीडिंग है या नहीं है. इसी तरह से एब्डोमिनल ब्लीड अगर होती है तो श्वास ब्लीड में जैसे मैंने बताया कि लोअर एब्डोमेन में दर्द, पेट के निचले हिस्से में दर्द होगा, पैर चलाने में दिक्कत होगी, पैर मोड़ के चलेगा मरीज, ये सारी प्रॉब्लम होगी, इससे पता चलेगा. इसके अलावा अगर ब्लैडर के अंदर ब्लीडिंग हो रही है तो पेशाब में खून आएगा, किडनी में कहीं ब्लीडिंग हुई तो पेशाब में खून आएगा. तो ये सारी चीजें हैं, लेकिन जो दो मेन चीजें हैं वो श्वास ब्लीड और ये ब्रेन ब्लीड है, जिसके बारे में सिम्टम्स के बारे में मरीजों को जानना बहुत जरूरी है.
सर एक लास्ट क्वेश्चन एक और है, आइडियल डिग्री ऑफ इंक्लिनेशन ऑफ अफेक्टेड पार्ट इन टर्म्स ऑफ एलिवेशन प्राइस. आइडियल डिग्री ऑफ इंक्लिनेशन ऑफ अफेक्टेड पार्ट इन टर्म्स ऑफ एलिवेशन.
एलिवेशन, सो एलिवेशन जो कंफर्टेबल जो एलिवेशन है वो 30 to 45 डिग्री है. इतने में पेशेंट जो है आइडियली कंफर्टेबल रहते हैं.
एक और क्वेश्चन आया है, एट व्हाट एज वी कैन डायग्नोज दैट इट इज हीमोफीलिया इन केस ऑफ इंटरनल ब्लीडिंग.
देखिए हीमोफीलिया की डायग्नोसिस तो जो पहली बार ब्लीड होता है, जॉइंट ब्लीड हो या कोई भी ब्लीडिंग मैनिफेस्टेशन आए बच्चे में, मान लीजिए बच्चा चलना शुरू किया, उसको बहुत बड़ा ब्लू कलर का कोई धब्बा बन गया शरीर के अंदर, इस तरह के, या इकाइमोटिक पैच का कोई पैच आ रहा है ब्लू कलर का, या कहीं से कट गया उसके बाद ब्लीडिंग नहीं रुक रही है, तो कोई भी पहला जो ब्लीडिंग एपिसोड होता है किसी भी छोटे बच्चे में, जो कि हो सकता है 4 महीने पे हो, 6 महीने पे हो, 1 साल पे हो, तो वो उस ब्लीडिंग का इवेल्युएशन करना बहुत जरूरी है. अगर उस ब्लीडिंग का हमने प्रॉपर तरीके से इवेल्युएशन किया तो हम पहली ब्लीडिंग के बाद ही ये बता सकते हैं कि इस बच्चे में हीमोफीलिया है कि नहीं है. वेस्टर्न कंट्रीज में यही होता है, पहली ब्लीडिंग के बाद ज्यादातर केसेस में पता चल जाता है कि इसमें हीमोफीलिया है या नहीं है. लेकिन हमारे यहाँ प्रॉब्लम यह है कि पहली ब्लीडिंग जब जॉइंट में होती है तो पहले हड्डी वाले डॉक्टर को दिखाते हैं, वो बच्चा गिर गया होगा, सूजन आ गई होगी इसलिए कह के टाल दिया. फिर दोबारा हुआ तो फिर हुआ कि बच्चा चलता है, छोटा बच्चा है, गिर जाता है, स्वेलिंग हुई, टाल दिया. सो कहने का मतलब यह है कि हमारे यहाँ जो डायग्नोसिस है वो कम से कम जो 5, 7, 10 बार ब्लीडिंग हो चुकी होती है तब डायग्नोसिस होती है. लेकिन अगर पेरेंट्स सतर्क हैं अपने बच्चे को लेके और उसमें अगर वो कुछ भी एबनॉर्मल इस तरह का लगता है, ये एक जागरूकता की बात भी है, तो वो तुरंत जाके जो है एक्सपर्ट से मिलें या अपने फिजिशियन से मिल के कहें कि भाई हीमोफीलिया तो नहीं है, इसकी हमें जांच करानी है, उसके लिए हमें क्या करना चाहिए, वो खुद ही उनको फिर डायरेक्ट करेंगे कि भाई आप यहाँ जाइए और उस हिसाब से जांच कराइए। डॉक्टर रश्मि कुछ कहना चाहेंगी इस बारे में?
सर एक क्वेश्चन और आया है।
रश्मि, डॉक्टर रश्मि कुछ कहना चाह रही हैं?
हाँ जी, मेरा ये कहना है कि अगर किसी भी पेशेंट को ब्लीड होता है और साथ में अगर फैमिली हिस्ट्री है पेशेंट के यहाँ, मतलब फैमिली में किसी भी मेंबर को इस टाइप की ब्लीडिंग है, तो वो मतलब आए और इन्वेस्टिगेट कराएं अपने आप को, या तो वो क्लिनिकल हेमेटोलॉजी में जाके पहले फैक्टर लगवाएं या उसके पहले सैंपल कलेक्ट कर लिया जाएगा वहां पे, और फिर उसको फिर आगे उसी हिसाब से इन्वेस्टिगेट किया जाएगा।
बिल्कुल।
आखिरी एक क्वेश्चन और आया है। डॉक्टर साहब, inhibitor patients may go to surgical intervention if it is needed.
क्या?
Inhibitor patient may go for surgical intervention if it is needed.
तो इस बारे में ये कहना जरूरी है कि जो नोवो 7 है, जो बाईपासिंग एजेंट है हमारे पास, नोवो 7 या फीबा है, इसकी जो अवेलेबिलिटी है वो काफी लिमिटेड रहती है, और जो भी सर्जिकल प्रोसीजर्स हैं उसमें जो इनका यूज है वो काफी हाई डोज में है, बहुत ही हाई डोज में है। तो अगर हम किसी भी पेशेंट के लिए कोई मेजर सर्जरी प्लान करते हैं तो उसमें बहुत ज़्यादा फैक्टर्स का यूज होता है, क्योंकि जैसा कि हम लोग जानते हैं कि नोवो 7 का जो हाफ लाइफ है केवल 2 घंटे का होता है। हर 2 घंटे पे आपको फैक्टर देना है, और हर 2 घंटे पे अगर हम जो डोज शेड्यूल्ड है उसके हिसाब से देते हैं तो 3, 4, 5 वायल तक हर 2-2 घंटे पे लगाना होता है। तो कहने का मतलब ये है, और ये कवरेज आपको देना है कम से कम 5 से 7 दिन, उसके बाद उसको लो डोज करके देना है। तो फैक्टर की अवेलेबिलिटी को देखते हुए, नोवो 7 की अवेलेबिलिटी को देखते हुए ये फिजिबल नहीं हो पाता ज्यादातर कंडीशंस में। इसीलिए इनहिबिटर के पेशेंट में सर्जरी जो है वो एक दुश्वार चीज है, जो कर पाना बहुत ही मुश्किल काम है। इसी कारण हमारे पेशेंट जो इनहिबिटर वाले हैं वो सर्जरी के लिए नहीं जा पाते हैं। बट छोटे मोटे इंटरवेंशन है जिसमें शॉर्ट टर्म के लिए नोवो 7 की जरूरत है, अगर उतना हमारे पास नोवो 7 अवेलेबल है तो जा सकते हैं। मेजर सर्जरी के लिए भी जा सकते हैं, लेकिन उसके लिए हमें पहले से प्री प्लानिंग करनी पड़ेगी, फैक्टर की अवेलेबिलिटी देखनी पड़ेगी, ये भी देखना पड़ेगा कि उसके कारण बाकी दूसरे पेशेंट कॉम्प्रोमाइज ना हो। ये देखते हुए हम लोग डेफिनेटली प्लान कर सकते हैं, लेकिन वो उसमें समय लगेगा, उस चीज को हमें अच्छे से प्लानिंग करना पड़ेगा।
And very knowledgeable Dr. S.P. Verma has contributed a lot towards this session. Dr. Verma, there is a curiosity in my mind. If you can know about it or answer it, just tell me. It is a spontaneous mutation, right? In a spontaneous mutation, whether it is a sperm which is affected or it is the ovum which is affected. Which is affected, the sperm or the ovum?
I am not sure about this, sir.
I know, because it has any of that may be affected, but the sperms, they have got a very high, meiosis rate.
Yes.
And therefore, there is more possibility of getting a sperm being mutated rather than an ovum.
Probably.
That's what I think. I don't know.
Yes. Sure.
Okay. So we come to the end of this session. Mr. Manchanda, thank you very much for appointing me as a chairman. Dr. S.P. Verma for his knowledgeable inputs. Dr. Rashmi, Dr. Anshul Gupta, Dr. Sanjay Mishra, they have provided very good outline of the general information about the hemophilia. Thanks a lot. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Manchanda ji.
थैंक यू डॉक्टर साहब। सर आप सबका बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद, आज आपने इतना टाइम अपने बिजी शेड्यूल से लिया। और मैं आप सबको फिर बता रहा हूँ कि इसी आईडी पर जो आईडी आज दी गई है, कल भी ठीक 12 बजे हम लोग फिर जुड़ेंगे। और कल फिजियोथेरेपी के सेशन काफ़ी सारे हैं, मुझे लगता है कि कुछ चेंज नज़र आएगा, लोग और ज़्यादा इंटरेस्ट से इसमें इन्वॉल्व होंगे। तो मैं आप सबको इनवाइट करता हूँ वंस अगेन कि कल 12 बजे हम लोग फिर इसी आईडी से फिर गूगल मीट पे जुड़ेंगे। थैंक यू सर। थैंक यू।